Afghanistan. It's important to separate the policy ending America's longest war from how that policy was implemented. Jake Sullivan becomes public face of Biden's crisis on Afghanistan, writes the Hill newspaper. Sullivan, a Minnesota native whom Clinton, meaning Hillary Clinton, referenced as a once-in-a-generation talent and potential future president. 44-year-old worked for Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, now President Biden's national security advisor. That's a key role that gives him unfettered access to the president. Joining us now, Mark Jacobson, Assistant Dean for Washington Programs at Syracuse University, worked for Democratic Senator Carl Levin, and also worked with NATO in Afghanistan. We appreciate you being here, sir. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. We can all agree that what's happened in Afghanistan over the past week has been a disaster. It's been an embarrassment. It's been horrible for the United States, worse for the Afghanis who helped the United States. Does Jake Sullivan deserve the blame?
Actually, I think President Biden deserves the blame more than anybody else. These are his calls in the end. But look, I think Jake, I think the Secretary of Defense, I think the Secretary of State, I think General Milley, all deserve a lion's share of the responsibility for missing this. Now, Jake Sullivan has a special role, and I think it's worth considering. Is he in a position where perhaps he can no longer serve the president effectively? Is he over his head, perhaps doing a job like this, and maybe he needs to resign? On the other hand, I think your previous guest was absolutely right. There are people who need to be fired, and I think that's one of the things people most people are focused on getting the Afghans out right now. But when you take a breath, you're trying to think, well, who's responsible for what we did wrong? And are we talking about people getting fired, or are we talking about people resigning?
It's so rare, especially these days, to hear members of the president's own party, and this was true during the Trump administration, calling an action by the president a disaster and saying he needs to be held responsible and people need to be fired. And you're not the only one. Brett Bruen, who was a national security official under the Obama administration, also called for Jake Sullivan's firing. He said the people, plans, and process the president has put in place to keep America safe are not working. Those he has chosen for key positions have repeatedly failed to challenge their own assumptions. It sadly led to the most unsuccessful, embarrassing day in the history of the National Security Council. It's important to remember that this is not Jake Sullivan's first rodeo in a disaster. He was a key player in pulling out some of the diplomatic security in Benghazi.
Well, look, you're not going to get me to even compare Benghazi to Afghanistan. This is a real disaster, not something made up for political purposes. But look, the point's the same. This is an interesting time. We have Democrats criticizing a Democratic president. I think that's how it should be. I would rather have seen many more Republicans criticize Donald Trump for the policy on Afghanistan. You're seeing a truly unified criticism of President Biden's policies, and that should tell you something. It should tell you that our senators and representatives are actually thinking through what are the problems, and more importantly, what are the obligations we have to the Afghan people that we as individuals who fought over there feel we have to people who saved our lives at times. I think
it's interesting reading. You say sort of universal condemnation. You're right. It's rare that you happen. Ralph Peters talked about Jake Sullivan on this program a couple of days ago. Here's what he said. Illustrated, a person can be intelligent, articulate, and utterly unable to rise to the moment. He was speaking about this soundbite. Take a listen.
The Taliban have informed us that they are prepared to provide the safe passage of civilians to the airport, and we intend to hold them to that commitment.
All right, he sounds like he's a true believer in the policy. Does he really think anybody takes him seriously in that comment?
We talk about the policy being an unmitigated disaster. I have been openly critical of how bad the public affairs dimension of this has been. You look at the body language of those people at the podium, whether it's at the Pentagon, the State Department, the White House. This stuff is a really hard sell. And I think there are a lot of people who are getting chalk on their feet from being close to that line between truth and lies. I mean, they're trying to really spin things. Remember the first week, retired Admiral John Kirby, this isn't a non-combatant evacuation operation. Yes, it is. This is exactly what that is. Yeah. These are the type, or we're not abandoning the Afghans. There's not a single Afghan in that country who doesn't feel that we are abandoning them right now. So
maybe with the exception of the Taliban, they seem to be celebrating.
Well, the Taliban, of course, are celebrating. Yeah. I mean, this is but it's it's really interesting. I mean, you can say things up there that are factually correct, but that are utterly misleading. And I expect more out of this administration. Look, Ralph Peters is spot on. We have some of the most brilliant foreign policy minds of my generation up there right now, people who, and they're experienced as well, but what they're showing is they're forgetting all of this. I mean,